Ladies and gentlemen, in the past 10 years, we faced somehow a green revolution. And that revolution was about how to produce abundant, cheap, reliable, affordable energy. 10 years ago, in 2006, Thomas L. Friedman, in his bestseller, Hot, Flat, and Crowded, was pointing to 5 issues to be tackled in the next 10 years. And those issues were energy and resources, supply and demand, petro-dictatorship, climate change, biodiversity loss, and energy poverty. We had some progress in the past 10 years, but are we there yet? And more, now we are speaking about new concepts. We are speaking about smart grids. We are speaking about big data. We are speaking about prosumers, and so on. Alessio, Menegazzo, Enel is a company present in the Forbes top 50 companies that are changing the world. We would be very, very curious to give us your input on when Enel stands when it comes to innovation and sustainability.
I will start with this. Today, the biggest company by market capitalization in the automotive sector is a company that was not existing 15 years ago and has produced so far less than 1 million cars. And if I want, and it's another example, and we will get back here later, I want to make a subscription to Netflix, it will take me around 1 minute, 1 minute and a half. We are speaking about very, very little time. And what does this have to do with energy, with innovation, with sustainability? It has a lot to do. Because at the end of the day, this company, this is Tesla, okay, is so successful because, and people are investing in this company, because they have, and they are able to sell in a very, very smart way, a vision of the future. Okay? They are selling a vision, investors are believing it, even if financials are not so fantastic so far. And Netflix is a company who makes a product and does it in a very smart way. And when I think that if somebody wants to make a contract with an utility company, it's not about minutes, it's about weeks. And this is a benchmark for us, because the vision of the people will get used to the 1 minute of Netflix, not to the weeks that are in the utility sector. So these are 2 external factors that are impacting us in a huge way. And if usually the utility sector has also, my friend Eric can say, was for, I don't know, 20, 30 years, a continuous investment in a grid, electricity or gas, trying to match best service with affordability to the end consumer. It's a regulated business, et cetera, et cetera. So now the disruption that we are facing is huge. So we have a hunch of what is going to happen, but the disruption and the transition is important. And at the end of the day, it will come all to the consumer. This is it, okay?
So it always happens.
Yes. But, you know, this energy sector was designed with, I don't know, big investments. And I will steal something that Eric said many times, that we were speaking about terawatt and then about gigawatt and then about megawatt and maybe watt at the end of the day. Because it is like this. So the concept was we built very big stuff, okay? We make very big wires, okay? We invest in very, very big tools. And then at the end of the chain, there is the consumer, who will be passive, let's say, in all this, let's say, chain, okay? And things are starting to change dramatically. The future of the energy sector is a future in which the consumers will lead the market. And we believe that in order to do this, the only path forward in the electricity sector is digitalization. If we are going and we want to free the customer and empower the customer to be the driver of this, let's say, paradigm, which is already complicated and now is getting also more complicated, we have to invest massive in digitalization. Because at the end of the day, technology is a tool to simplify people's life. So I don't want to speak very much, but at the end of the day, it's very important that in this paradigm that is not happening also in Romania, it's happening in all over the world. Everybody is discussing this stuff that is going on. You have to have, as an investor, you have to have the comfort of proper regulation and a proper legislative framework. Because if we are all still concentrated on hard wires and hardware and big stuff, okay, it will be very, very difficult to attract the needed investment to invest in digitalization, which is more IT, more soft, rather than hardware. And this is something that I think will be and is the most relevant discussion here in Romania those days. The fact that we have to have a more sophisticated, a smarter discussion about what we want to have as an electricity sector. We have to maybe get loose of stuff that are very much put in our DNA, okay, about the big stuff I'm speaking. Because the future, and it's maybe 5, 10, 15 years, 20 years, but we have to build it now, it will be a future with a prosumer, with the customer as the center, the citizen at the center of this paradigm, and we cannot afford to lose time, because otherwise investment will go in other countries, and the gap that Andrea was speaking before will only increase, and we cannot allow this anymore.
Thank you very much. I'll come back with a direct question to this. But meantime, please, Eric Stubb, as a representative of one of the largest utility companies in the world and the largest gas retailing distributor in Romania, what are the trends in the energy sector, and how does these trends impact Romania or the Eastern Europe?
Well, thank you, Christian. Thank you as well to Aspen for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here with you today. Indeed, it is true, the energy sector is going through a massive transformation, which is deeply changing the business model of all energy companies. We like to sum this transformation up with the expression, the 4 Ds. 1D is decarbonization. Another one is decentralization. A third one is deregulation. And of course, last but not least, the very important one, which was already mentioned by Alessio as well, is D for digitalization. These 4 Ds do have a huge impact on the way we are starting to do business, and of course, the way we will keep doing business in the future. So what do they really stand for? I mean, the first one, decarbonization, obviously we all see it. There has been a massive development of renewable energy all across the world. Congressman Poe mentioned it earlier on as well. There's a lot of wind in West Texas. There's a lot of wind along the coast of the Black Sea. And there's a lot of wind and sun in many, many places. And this led, indeed, to the development of significant renewable generation capacities. And Alessio has actually not been stealing from me, but from our group chairman, Gérard Mestrallet, who indeed, to try to illustrate what's been going on, is often saying that until 10, 12 years ago, the standard unit in our industry was the gigawatt, 1,000 megawatt. Why? Because this was the typical size of a nuclear reactor or of a large coal-fired power plant. When renewables started to develop, we all learned to speak in megawatts, so 1,000 times smaller. And now, indeed, with the fact that we have more and more customers who become their own producers, who have photovoltaics on their rooftop, for instance, we're speaking increasingly in kilowatts. What this means is that within 10 years, the standard unit in our sector has decreased by a factor of 1 million. And I can tell from the gigawatt down to the kilowatt. And I can tell you this indeed is dramatically changing the business model of our industry. The other aspect, which is of course key in decarbonization, is energy efficiency. We all know that the cheapest energy is and will always be the energy you do not consume. And the potential there is huge. It's true everywhere. It's very true as well here in Romania. You just need to walk around the streets of Bucharest or of any other city looking at the buildings, and you'll see that there's a lot that can be done, starting with insulation. The energy intensity of Romania is twice the European average. So let's imagine what you could do in terms of efficient use of resources if you would manage to bring the energy intensity of Romania down to the level of the European average. At the end of the day, we should never forget either. That's also a link with what Andrea was powerfully presenting earlier on, energy poverty. An energy bill is the result of the multiplication of a price times a volume. If you work on decreasing the volumes, you will already manage to get more and more people out of energy poverty. So these are, some of the key challenges we're facing with respect to decarbonization, and then that trend will keep going. The second D, decentralization, is also increasingly important. We all see the development of on-site generation. I mentioned earlier the fact that you do have more and more consumers who become prosumers, so from being con energy, so against energy, you become pro-energy because you start producing energy for your own needs, and you get, of course, also a better feeling for the value of energy. And clearly, this is a trend that we see in many, many places already, that is starting to come to Eastern Europe, that is starting to come to Romania as well. And of course, this is raising questions for us as energy suppliers and distributors, because it's affecting, of course, our networks, but also of our way to sell energy in the future. You also see more and more so-called micro cogeneration plants, micro CHPs, being built in hotels, in office buildings, and so on. So we're really going away from those large power plants gradually to this decentralized world. The third D is deregulation. This is especially true in many European countries, especially in Eastern Europe, where we are still, converging with the rest of Europe with respect to liberalization of energy markets. This has a number of consequences as well. I mean, the general trend is to let market forces play. But of course, this has, of course, the big benefit of developing competition, and competition does revive business, as the Germans tend to say. Konkurrenz belebt das Geschäft in German. So I think it's always good to have competitors ahead of you or behind you to ensure that you keep your organization under tension and that you keep moving into the right direction. But equally, deregulation is raising the question, which was very well presented earlier, of how we take care of and protect vulnerable consumers. This is a topic that indeed we still need to address much better than it is currently done, especially here in Romania, but it's not the only country in that situation. And I think we as suppliers of energy do have a duty to also come up with solutions and to try to make the authorities who can shape legislation and regulations understand how to get that done and how to ensure that in the end we get as many people as possible out of energy poverty. And the last D, last but not least, is digitalization. Clearly, it is a massive game changer. It's playing an always more important role in our way of doing business. It's true in our interaction with customers, but it's also true with respect to our internal processes. If I look back a little bit, until, say, 7-8 years ago, customers were queuing in front of our offices to pay their energy bills. They had got an envelope with an invoice inside, and having got this envelope, they came to our offices and they queued to pay for their energy. If I look at what has changed in the meantime, today we have approximately 25% of our customers who no longer get a paper bill. They only get their bill per email. We have an increasing number of customers who are paying their bills with their smartphones. Back then, they had to queue, sometimes for a fairly long time, to pay and ensure that they're not being cut off. So this is an illustration of what kind of game changer digitalization can be. There are many, many applications that have been developed as well by all energy suppliers, making the life of customers easier. We spoke, or Andrea mentioned also some of the bureaucratic hurdles you have to overcome when you want to get access to energy. Well, thanks to many of those applications, things can go much faster. So this is good for our customers. This is also good for our businesses because thanks to that, we become more efficient. So these are, I would say, the key trends we see in our industry. And the challenge for us, of course, is to identify the next trends. What is going to be the fifth D? That's the challenge for our R&D departments. We're all looking for unicorns, which, as you know, are difficult to find. We're happy when we find elephants, preferably not pink elephants, because we wouldn't quite know what to do with them. But still, I mean, this is what we are all looking for, and I think the sheer fact that we are now focusing much more on innovation, on identifying trends, and understanding what this means to meet our customer expectations shows that the old utility company of yesterday has gone forever. I'll stop here.
Thank you. A very interesting input. Now, Mr. Pinner, there are a lot of challenges, a lot of opportunities, a lot of disrupting factors, and a lot of game changers. You see the world as a whole with your activity. Are you pessimistic or optimistic?
That's a great question, and thank you for the introduction, and thank you to the Aspen Institute for inviting me here. So flown over from Silicon Valley, and I think the fifth D, getting back to your point, is disruption, and it's business model disruption, and I'll come back to that. But maybe wanted to give you a little bit of a global view of what we see and the path that we're on, and kind of ask, is that path the right one? And if not, what we should be doing about it. And maybe backing into it a little bit from a kind of demand and supply point of view. And the overall narrative here is I'm very optimistic. We spoke earlier, but if I just take demand, if you look at demand now of energy, and it was mentioned, I think, by the senator, it's going up year by year, but it's decoupling from GDP, which is important. And so the productivity is going up, which is important. And there are a couple of big sources of change that are coming. So in the oil and gas industry, for example, the demand for liquids, we think will peak at around 2040 or so, with the demand for road transport liquids potentially peaking as early as 2025. Interesting dimension. Electrification of industries, et cetera, will probably double the demand for electricity from, I think, about 70 petajoules today to about 140, which is a 2x increase, is massive. Also on the demand side, we see regulation, sometimes from countries, like you see France and UK banning things like diesel and internal combustion engines by 2040. China recently came out with a similar announcement, but without a date, etc. So on the supply side, what do we see? You see renewables being built out at a rate of about 3 gigawatts a week. Wind now in the US, and the senator or the congressman referred to it, is close to $20 per megawatt hour in terms of cost, which is just stunning. And so if you pull all this together, what is going on and where do we currently stand? If you look at the US where I am based, coal, the percentage of coal in the power sector has gone down from about 40% in 2014 to about 30% now. Displaced almost entirely by natural gas. And that one of the biggest disruptions in the energy industry that is rarely talked about, although the congressman referred to it, is the shale gas revolution that's happened in the US, putting gas prices now around $2 per MMBTU. It is effectively turning coal plants off one by one throughout the US. So that disruption right now has been led more by shale gas than renewables, although renewables are coming in quite a bit on the back end. And then on the investment side, if you piece it all together, it's about $500 billion a year going into sort of non-carbon assets, and we think that will go up to about $3.5 trillion which is like a 7x increase by 2050, both on supply and a lot on the demand side, efficiency and a number of other areas. But where does it leave us? If you look at carbon emissions, which is ultimately what this is about, carbon emissions between 15 and 16 were roughly flat, around 34 gigatons. If you wind the clock forward with all those things I just described, you get to an area that is still probably 25% over where it needs to be by about 2035. So still a fair bit off the pace. And the reason is some of these assets, particularly in the power sector, they're 40, 50-year assets and just take a long time to displace. So all of that activity I described still only moves, if you look at primary energy content of all energy sources, at the moment, I think about 81% of it or so is fossil-based. Over, between now and 2050, with all that disruption I was just described, it only comes down to about 70%. It just takes a long, long time to change this. So why then am I optimistic? Because it seems that this ship is going to take a long time to re-steer. And it gets back to this fifth D, which is disruption. And I think what we're seeing, which makes us excited, is the narrative is changing in the business community. And the reason is they're feeling the pain. They're feeling the pain on the income statement side, and they're feeling the pain on the balance sheet side. If you look in the US, independent power producers, they're now cases of bankruptcy, where it is kind of impossible to survive. And why is that? Why can renewables and things like this cause this disruption? And it's something quite interesting, which is renewables run at a zero marginal cost. And so the incremental hour costs nothing. And if you're a dispatcher, you always put it at the front of the queue. And therefore, you can't run that nuclear plant, and you can't run that coal plant. And so that's kind of one aspect. And the other aspect is decentralization, which is eating into the capital that regulated utilities would like to commit and get a regulated return on. They can no longer do that. They don't control it. So even a 1% penetration of solar is hugely disruptive to a regulated utility if their growth is only 1.5%, because it just wiped out 3/4 of their capital. And then an area we haven't talked about much is mobility. You referred to it on Tesla. But this is something that I think is underappreciated, and I just did a tiny bit of research from where we are in Romania on mobility, and my understanding is about 500 electric vehicles were sold in Romania last year. I think you got one of the largest subsidy programs at about 10,000 euros per car. I also understand that Uber are quite prevalent now or available in a couple of cities. For various reasons, we think that this trend in mobility could move in sort of 10, 15 years for complete disruption as opposed to 50 in the power sector. And it's because of the consumer. It's because these cars have a 7 to 10 year life cycle, not a 50-year life cycle. And it's just because of the waste in the system. Just to give you a sense, 1% of the fuel that is burnt in a car is used to pushing you forward. Of that car, at least in the US, if you own a car, it's probably the worst investment you could make. 96% of the time it sits in your drive. 4% you're driving. Of that, a third of the time you are either looking for parking or stuck in traffic. 50% of the real estate in cities is dedicated to cars in the form of parking and road signs and car parks, 50%. Accident rates are very high, 95% of them are human-caused. So this is something that's just ripe for disruption. And you can bring the cost of transport down from about $1 per mile to 10 cents. That's like 90% reduction. Huge waste in the system. And you all know, if you've been out late at night on a Friday and you hit that Uber thing and it says it will cost you 2.5x to get home, you say yes. So it's inherently a value-added service. It's not a commodity electron. So our sense is this could move in 10 years. It's just interesting looking around Romania, where I don't think this has come yet. I got a feeling this is going to come really fast. And we see it now with the OEMs, who I think in the next 3 years will release 250 new electric platforms. This is all the major car companies. So this disruption is rife. So that's why I'm optimistic, because I think the incumbents, who normally are a little slow here, are being disrupted in such a fundamental way that they'll have to change. But this doesn't solve the problem. I'll just name 2 or 3 others and then stop. So I think we have a clear path to decarbonization in power. I think we have a clear path to decarbonization in mobility. We do not have one in the industrial sector. 80% of the energy used in the industrial sector is heat, and decarbonizing heat is hard. We haven't kind of figured that out. We also have a huge stranded assets problem that I think we need to think about. I mean, the utility of the past may not be the utility of the future, but we need the wires. The wires will reduce the system cost massively, so we need to find a way of making them play. New technologies, they do need investing in. The ones we've got are not, they're great, but we will need zero carbon fuels. You think, well, what is that? We will need next generation nuclear. We will need hydrogen in some form. We will need high voltage direct current lines. And then lastly, the thing that makes me excited is investors, the institutional investors and the pension funds, haven't yet realized, or they are soon realizing, that the returns associated with this type of infrastructure, 6, 7, 8% boring returns, is exactly aligned to their long-term obligations. And at the moment, they have 2% bond investments, 20% private equity investments, and this is almost the only type of asset class at scale that will fulfill a lot of what they need to do without the volatility of fuel risk, etc. So net, I'm very optimistic.
Very, very good message. We'll try to be optimistic too, based on this, of course. Mr. Bining, as one of the most prominent experts in the Romanian power sector, and given the actual state of the Romanian power sector, where do you see the biggest opportunities for innovation? And what would be the main challenges in implementing new technologies and paradigm shift, if we can speak about it, for the next years?
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for having me here and for the question. I would start with the quote that we heard in the European Utilities Week last year, related to disruption, the 5th D, which was Uber or be Uberized. This year, the European Utility Week has brought another D, which is diversity. And I'm glad to have a proof in our forum today. But another D, which was brought to the focus of the attention, is data regulation. Companies have to prepare on one side for the data tsunami, but on the other side, they have to know what to do with this data. And the utility companies are going to handle more and more personal data of their customers. And on one side, they have to align to the new General Data Protection Regulation, which will be enforced starting July 2018. and which till now has been perceived as a compliance challenge, more of a legalistic approach, but in fact, combined also with the cybersecurity concerns, it is a multidisciplined challenge for the utility companies. But left aside that, there are other elements related to data regulation. The first one is the fact that the grid operator controls a lot of data on grid users. And on the other side, it is affiliated with a supply company, which is unbundled as per the European legislation, but would like to use the same data on the customers, which are the grid users. And initially, some utility companies started by defining common IT systems which would process this data, but then the message came, oh, wait a minute. There should be a discipline in the usage of this data. So if the distribution arm of the group makes available data about grid users to its affiliated supplier, it should either do it against a charge, or if it does it freely, it should do the same for all the suppliers which are using the same grid. And now we have another debate, which was also enhanced during the yesterday finished European Utilities Week, about the regime of the data which is owned by utilities. And the latest proposal is that such data should be used as public data, public sector data. And this was linked also to the discussion on vulnerable customers. Romanian authorities, be it Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Labor, or energy regulator, do not have, in fact, sufficient information about the potentially declared vulnerable customers. Remember 2014, when the percentage of vulnerable customers was 100%.
Exactly.
And at that moment, it was the bosses of the utility companies which came out and said, thank you very much, but I would not consider myself as a vulnerable customer. Yeah. But still, we have the obligation, according to the directive, to identify those people and define aid directly channeled to them, but we still do not know the categories of customers and how to define them as vulnerable customers. And in our business environment organizations, we tell to the organizations, to the authorities, please talk to us. We do have this information in a certain form. But on the other side, when we come to the utilities, they say, yeah, but you know, I collected this information as part of my commercial effort to understand the best of the behaviors of my customers, the load profile, the behaviors, and so on. Why should I share this information now with the authorities and eventually get responsible for that type of, for the exactness of my information and so on. So we will have a very interesting dialogue in this field on how to fulfill the requirements of the directive. On the other side, how to respect the efforts of the utility companies to collect customer-centric data. I would also like to elaborate a little bit on the disruption, where once again an important element which has been voiced is the power of partnerships. Practically coming back from Uber or be Uberized, everybody in the space looks for the future Uber of the utility universe, and would like to be there to partnership with that guy, to partner with the guy before he partners with somebody else. Because if somebody finds the unicorn and some big player, let's say, gets the advantage of partnership, of the partnership with that unicorn finder and gains a commercial advantage, the others might be losing the competition. So at this moment, we notice a very interesting opening of the big players towards partnerships. And I would say that Romania is a natural reserve of such type of intelligence. We see plenty of Silicon Valley venture capitalists coming to Romania to find brains. And here I would go further. Years ago, I was working with the Romanian American Enterprise Fund. We were developing decentralized cogeneration solutions. And when I have presented the advantages of those solutions to an international conference, the equipment suppliers, of course, the transformers, wires suppliers, and so on, said, yeah, very nice, but you need a certain threshold above which the decentralized generation will be an issue to the system, because you need to ensure the adequacy of the system. And this argument was used in favor of keeping the remote gigawatts alive and the kilometers of high voltage and medium voltage lines also in the field, because micro solutions together would not have been able to ensure the adequacy of the overall national power system. But it seems there is a new solution which might solve even this issue. And also the European Utilities Week has mentioned 100 possible applications of the blockchain technology. And practically it seems that in a matter of decades, we will be able to trade bilaterally without any further using an OPCOM or a national dispatch center. And once again, I think that this is a great opportunity for Romania, given the IT capabilities and the proven applications which have been developed here, to start working more on blockchain and to work towards promotion of such types of solutions. And I think that utility companies present here may start partnerships with such type of solution developers, because who knows, maybe the unicorn may jump out from here. Of course, I would have many other ideas. One of them is noticing that utility companies concentrate more and more on provision of services, energy services, and it seems the trend is to go towards delivering the energy commodity for free, just for the sake of being present in the household and delivering services. Romania is subject of a very important transformation. We were educated with the mind that the bulk of the energy consumption in this country comes from industry, and population is beyond the comma. And now we discover that, for instance, the Romanian population consumes more primary energy in the form of firewood than the whole electricity consumption of the country. And in fact, we are toughening the conditions for the use of this firewood, and we have to start thinking about replacement fuels. And this comes to the idea that, in fact, natural gas in Romania would gain a very important role as transition fuel. Ambassador Morningstar mentioned that probably for the US, the natural gas would be a transition fuel for something like 40 to 50 years. I was wondering which would be the transition duration for Romania, which at this moment prepares for the depletion of the known onshore reserves and still has not adopted the right royalties and fiscality regime for the offshore proven reserves to have them strike the market at the right moment. Supposing they will find a reasonable framework for hitting the Romanian market, we count in the energy strategy on natural gas, practically an unchanged weight in the overall mix of primary energy until 2050. But on the other side, we are also aware that any investment in gas infrastructure, which would be made after 2030 in the European Union, would become stranded cost. I don't know, the list of challenges may continue, but I look to my time constraints, and I'm open for answering further questions. Thank you.
Definitely, there are a lot of questions, and there were a lot of great subjects mentioned here. But I would stay on one issue that also is an interest for me too, because we see more and more the growing concept of energy innovators. And you made a parallel between the energy revolution and Silicon Valley and so on and so forth. So if we compare the energy industry in terms of innovation with the most boiling of the industries, like the IT industry, do you feel that there is room in our sector for the next energy Google? Or are we, can we have in this field people throwing crazy dollars on 100,000 of ideas, on 100,000 of garages, developing new technologies, can it be the energy industry what, in the next years, what it was the IT industry in the 80s or 90s?
Where?
In the world.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because it's big. Yeah.
Mr. Binning.
First of all, at this moment it is said that each smart meter equals a smartphone. So practically I see a convergence of the two. I also see utility companies offering smart home solutions, which means that they really have to get competent in that field. I also see IT, or let's say cable providers, dreaming about supplying electricity or even having started to supply electricity to Romanian households. This was the idea I was mentioning, that Romania was blessed with a variety of energy vectors which enter a normal Ceausescu-built apartment. You have the gas entry, you have the water entry, the electricity entry, the telephone entry, the heating entry. Each of them is an opportunity for a utility company provider, to get into the house and offer services. I was mentioning with the occasion of another conference that the teammates of Eric came to my apartment and have done everything up to cleaning my air conditioning filters. And I was paying less for the gas than for the other services. And then I was wondering, why wouldn't Radet think about it and eventually do the same? Alessio's teammates do car towing at this moment, just to make a striking example, left aside the others. So there is this battle for provision of services, and on the other side, there is more and more integration between energy supply and IT services supply. And I think the blockchain technology would be the best carrier for this type of integration. So I see a lot of convergence. And in fact, we assist companies now in doing the smart transformation. 2-3 years ago, I didn't know what that means. I thought it's more smart grids and so on. It has nothing, or let's say not nothing to do, but it's much more complex than just putting a smart meter at the entrance of a consumer. The companies change, the companies digitalize, and practically I see an integration between the two types of services.
Mm-hmm. Could I put a counterpoint of view?
Please, I was just inviting you
my counterpoint of view, I compare maybe energy and power to transport. I just worry in the power sector, it fundamentally it's a commodity. And I think the value-add services on top of it are a source of value add, but I just wonder whether there's enough that it doesn't still end up to be a bit of a race to the bottom. And I contrast that with the transport space, where someone getting from A to B on time is worth a lot of money to them, and I'm going to race to the airport after this, and that matters to me, and I will pay top dollar to get there. And I'm just not sure you're going to pay that to have your light bulb turned on. And I think one of the reasons, just take Silicon Valley, they threw a lot of money at the energy space, and almost to a man, they all got burnt. And these funds have, you mentioned, if you've got a solar generation technology, it is almost uninvestable. If you say, I've got something that goes in your car that will do machine learning and I can sell it to insurance companies and I'll stop accident rates, that is enormous amounts of value. So I think that there's some real hubris around startup investing in the energy space. And I would also argue if you go to, say, oil and gas versus power, the innovation in that sector has been unbelievably high. And they mentioned the shale gas, which is hydraulic fracking, et cetera, was an incredible story of innovation. So there is innovation in the industry. I just worry on the generation and providing electrons, whether there's enough value for a unicorn-like player to emerge.
Thank you very much. We really do want to open the stage for the audience, and I would be very, very curious to find an answer on how hard it is to speak about prosumers and blockchain to the people when most of the people, when receiving their energy bill, are able only to read the value and the due date. But while we are thinking about this question, I would also like to invite Mr. Damov, co-founder of Green Group, to tell us very, very briefly on what is the connection between the Green Group and innovation and sustainability.
Thank you very much. Energy and substance, this constitutes universe. So we have been talking so long about energy. I'll speak about the material part. And I will say that today in human race, it's consuming every year 41 billion tons of natural resources every year, which means for our comfort today, we need 6 tons every year. This is a cost that our planet is paying for our cost, our consumption. What is more dramatic is about 91% of the consumption, which becomes waste, is going to be landfill. And this way cannot serve us anymore for the good future. We are trying, and we have a very short movie there, we are trying to reintegrate the waste into industry. And I would say that the waste was too much treated as a threat for the environment. Today, this is an opportunity for industry. Practically, every piece of waste can be reoriented into another process. And we're trying to do this. There is a biological cycle which our food and everything which grows naturally returned into nature. Nature knows how to treat it and decompose. But in recent year, we have been created so many synthesis material, like we have electronics, we have plastics, which have been produced in a special condition that nature cannot reproduce. So nature cannot digest this waste. So technical cycle, we really need to treat it using the same model of the nature. The nature is having all the cycles, like water or any other cycle, doesn't create waste. Our way of living, called linear economy, it's always creating waste, because at the end, we actually we are extracting, building, consuming, and dumping. We need to change totally this direction. And if have been so many initiatives like zero waste in the world, which is the philosophy, it's a zero waste, the action plan would be actually implemented by the circular economy. So circular economy is not only a philosophic approach, but it's a reality that happens. In Romania, we do this now. Even Romania is having a low collection rate, but we are on a good road now, saying that we found now for every other material produced by municipal waste, a road to be reintegrated. And I will give a few examples. We are recycling PET bottles. The PET bottles, they go back into synthetic fiber, which you find in every automotive industry. Maybe this carpet is produced with such a fiber. Electronics go back to metals and materials. We have been created in Romania 4,000 jobs, and this was costing an investment of 110 million euro. What the figures are saying, that every 135 tons recycled create one new job. So it's a big potential.
Let's recycle more.
Yeah. The impact of circular economy actually is increasing every other country the utilization of its natural resources. Romania has very low revenue on its natural resource utilized. It's 2.5 less than the average in Europe, which means we are selling just raw material with very low added value. Circular economy is disconnecting the economic growth from consumption of natural resources. It's actually economic growth without consumption. And this really, it's a challenge. And I will say for poorer country, it's more challenge than the rich countries. Because the jobs are not very well paid. And Romania is having an advantage because here the salaries are lower than Western Europe. So that's why we are more efficient in recycling industry. This is in a few words about the circular economy. If any question, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you
very much. We do open the discussion to the audience, so please feel free to make yourself visible for if there are any questions. But meantime, please, Alessio and Mr. Stab, how do we make the people prosumers, starting with the point where we are now?
Well, for example, one of the way to make the prosumer comfortable, because it will happen. It's not a matter of it will happen or not, it will happen.
So it is realistic?
Absolutely. It's, for example, and to answer to Vali, is to make everything open. There is no possibility that in the future the, let's say, blocking data will be a possibility. You were referring to the fact that the utilities, the distribution and the supply, everything has to be open in the future. The data has to be open. The data that we have as distributors has to be open because this data has to be worked.
I said there are discussions about
No,
it.
but
I didn't express a position myself.
Yes, but I am expressing mine. So, and this is that it has to be open. Because otherwise there will be no possibility to, let's say, free the customer, and this is the unicorn that we are all looking at. It's in front of our face, and it's the customer. And we have to be very, very relaxed and leave us be guided by the customer. And this is the biggest challenge of all, because we are all time biased. Okay? We come in a sector that it was extremely monopolized, in which we know, run by engineers, okay, that exactly know what has to do, okay? And it's changing. So the unicorn is the customer, and we have to liberate us in order to serve him. Now, so the prosumer is something that is real, but again, how do you tackle this? Because at the end of the day, we can speak about someone that can produce and sell energy. A car can be seen as a mobile battery that goes from a place to the other and provides electricity in moments of peaks. This is a technology that we are testing in Denmark, because in Denmark there is, let's say, a regulatory framework that permits you to test things in a very innovative way. So at the end of the day, I think it's very possible. It's very soon to come. Okay. Of course, if a big company like ours will not be as relaxed as I said, yes, we will lose a lot, because the path is sure for the zero marginal cost. So I don't know if zero marginal cost means zero marginal profit, but it will be a problem if we don't find a solution in this. And in the same time, you know, making things open. Okay? It will tackle the problem of the prosumer. It will tackle the problem of demand response. But it will tackle also another problem, because we are speaking about the vulnerable customer, okay? Degrees of vulnerability. And we are trying to profile the how is, where does he live, how. But at the end of the day, our duty is to take these people out of the vulnerability area, because we don't have to profile them. We have to make their life better. And that is our margin. Our margin in the future is there, to make people's life a little bit better, more comfortable. And for us, this is the biggest disruption, this is the biggest unicorn. And we are the let's say, first enemies of ourselves. Okay.
Sounds very good. We have a question in the room.
Thank you. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Richard Sanker from BNP Paribas. Thank you very much for a very, very bold comment and very high-level presentations. I just have a question about nuclear energy, and where does it fit in that scope and brilliant future, so to speak?
Would you like to point out?
Well, I mean, it's fully open. I mean, who feels comfortable with that?
Mr. Binning?
I do have a history of negotiating the Cernavodă 3 and 4 projects. I will not try to get into details because I'm under a confidentiality obligation. But definitely, nuclear is perceived by one category of people as low carbon, while others see it as a dangerous source of nuclear waste. I even remember a time when the special rapporteur of the European Parliament told us that they tried to promote carbon tax, and the ones to oppose this carbon tax were the Greens, because they oppose nuclear. So this is why we don't have a CO2 tax in Europe, because the Greens oppose the nuclear. Nuclear has, besides the waste issue, the financing issue. At this moment, the recovery of the investment goes towards more than 30 years, or anyhow beyond the threshold of a normal commercial funding. Proliferation of nuclear is dependent on governments spending on development of technology and absorbing major losses. We know that our provider of the technology has seen the home country government cut the support for developing new generations of reactors. And in fact, any funding for this type of new investment is dependent on the government's decisions to support the nuclear technology providers from the home country, and to have somehow the technology development costs covered by customers on long term. So yes, we look to the Energiewende, for instance, where all of a sudden they said, okay, the philosophy was baseload nuclear, baseload hydro, and renewables to cover only the peaks of consumption. And all of a sudden they said, no, it's going to be vice versa. We go from the peak of consumption, we cover everything we can with renewables, and what is left at the bottom should be covered with the conventional technologies. Are they able to do it or not? Can we play with the nuclear reactors like we play with the motorcycle or not? So yes, there are challenges. That's a lot of politics inside. And I don't think that it's simply a matter of common business sense. It goes beyond. And without states, without governments, the future of nuclear is really unclear. So it's not a question for people here, it's a question for governments.
I think this is indeed very true. Just to rebound on what Vali was saying, I think the future of nuclear depends very much on the place you're speaking about. In market-driven economies, it is extremely difficult to build a new nuclear power plant today, mostly for two reasons. One is the cost. When you look at the price of electricity today, when you look at the cost of a nuclear power plant and actually the price of electricity you need to achieve if you want to have any kind of return when, it is extremely difficult. The second aspect that people tend to underestimate when we speak about nuclear is basically how long a nuclear plant is living and dying. We're speaking about a century. From basically the whole planning and construction period to the production period and then the dismantling, we're speaking about a century. And it is indeed very difficult in short-term market-driven economies to take such decisions. It is easier in countries that face massive growth of energy demand, that are maybe less market-driven and where the state, to come back to what Vali was saying, can intervene more easily and ensure that those projects will indeed have a return over time. And that's why today, when you see where nuclear power plants are being, or when you look at where power plants are being built, well, yeah, you look at China, for instance, and the number of nuclear power plants they are building every year, simply because they have a huge need for new generation assets to meet the development of demand. But in Europe, it's getting increasingly difficult, not to say impossible.
Just to add one comment without breaking confidentiality aspects, I was also involved in the quantitative modeling for the energy strategy of Romania. And we have seen statements that the new nuclear power plant may need a strike price around 82 euros per megawatt hour, and we have seen a lot of, let's say, opinion makers jumping and saying, that's impossible, today the price is 36, how can we dream about 82? And I think we need to be realistic and to have a long-term vision. If we take the decision to make the plants now, they will be operational probably within 8 to 10 years. And then the question is, what is going to be the price in Romania on the wholesale market within those 10 years? The modeling of the ton of CO2 price on the European trading scheme shows prices going beyond 25 euros per ton towards 40 euros per ton, while the nuclear technology is low carbon. On the other side, this technology is, or those units are already 50% made, And the technology has an exceptional utilization rate of 94% in terms of energy availability. To add to this the interesting cost of capital, when you make the merit order of the candidate units to join the system, it has an exceptional position. So this is why the document which was published by the previous government contains clearly the continuation of those two units. And this should not be surprising. Just imagine that one lignite-fired power plant in the Oltenia energy complex, which is now the marginal generator for Romania, has a 36 euros per megawatt hour, which is not necessarily break-even, and consider that for each megawatt hour there is 1 ton of CO2 emitted. If the price goes with the price of the ton of CO2, we approach that limit. Imagine how much is requested today by the wind power generators and solar power generators with the green certificates included. This exceeds 100 euros per megawatt hour. Imagine the long-term marginal cost for new hydro. It's about 80 to 90 euros per megawatt hour. So 82 euros per megawatt hour for 2026 and onwards is not exceptional. The strategy document discusses about an average wholesale price for Romania in that time frame of over 80 euros per megawatt hour. So overall, this unit from calculation made today appears as attractive. But on the other side, if we look to the published documents in terms of what support measures are needed for such a unit, would be an enormous challenge for Romania as an EU member. We know that UK has said at a certain moment, Hinkley Point C is crucial for the security of energy supply of our country, and we are ready to discuss our membership of the EU if we will be precluded from making this plant. Well, now we are talking Brexit, so. But we were looking to the same example and thinking, can we also use that? So the dimension of the case is extremely challenging. The complications which are generated by this project are enormous, and this is practically a challenge for the Romanian institutions to make this process go through.
Thank you. My name is Anda Anica. I am a recent graduate in Sustainable Development Studies. And I also have a question for Mr. Damov, because I had the opportunity to spend some time in France and Germany, and I realized the recycling system functions really well. But it functions well not only because the system works well, but also because people know that they have to recycle, they know where to go and what to do. So my question for you is, do you consider having some raising awareness campaigns in Romania? And if you do, like, what's the target? And if you consider partnering with some ministry, maybe the Ministry of Education and some NGOs to raise awareness, because it's a pity to have such an amazing plant that has such a big capacity and not to use it and maybe even import trash from outside instead of recycling our own waste. Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Damov, no pressure, but we'll finish with you.
Of course, it's all separate. It's like food. You never want to have in a pot mixed all your menu, so you better have it separate in different plates. So absolutely has to be separate. And the answer for education. Yes, education is good. It's for the long term. Romania and humanity is in a crisis. It's not only Romania, but also in countries where awareness is very well practiced. I'll give you an example. We have been very well educated where to park. We don't have parking in this city. And it's the same. We are educating, and there are a lot of very educated people. If there is no infrastructure to collect, separate, we are just talking, and we stay in the theoretical cloud. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Thank you to our panelists for their inputs. We'll finish here with the conclusion that we need to go from big to smart, from big systems to smart systems, from big data to smart data, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much.